sure this works. Yep, okay. Yeah. Good color choice.
The blue.
That's good. Good design decision. Okay, well, let's get started, I guess.
Cool.
All right, good evening.
It is evening now.
Yeah, thank you all for staying to the end to catch our presentation. My name is Rob Rowland, and this is Catherine Katie Fukuda. This is our second year presenting at ETJ, and we'll be presenting about building global citizenship through student-centered group work. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about several things. We're going to start with an introduction, talk about the project proper, and then details. So let's start with the introduction. What we're going to be talking about today is a curriculum that we ran with a group of high school students at a private institution in Tokyo. If you're a high school teacher, we hope that this is directly relevant to your context, and if you're not, we hope to start a dialogue with everyone about how to make this content accessible to students in different contexts, and we think that it will be accessible. So that's who we are and what we're trying to do. And could you tell them a little bit more about our context?
Sure, if you could change a slide.
Sure. We'd be happy to. Yep.
Okay, so like Rob said, we teach at a private high school. The high school has an English focus to it, so students who have elected to go to the school are interested in English before they even get there, which does help with their motivation. Not necessarily their proficiency, but their interest in what you're teaching. And our program in specific is the English program, and it's a pull-out class of the normal students. They've been identified as highly academically motivated students who are really good at studying, and thusly they came in with high entrance exam scores or high grades from junior high school. If you grew up in the States, it's kind of like an AP program. So they get taken out and put at an advanced level, and that's the student level that we teach with this program.
Oh, it's a group of, it's 2 classes of 24 students. That's what we're teaching now. In the past, it was 4 classes of 20 students-ish, but it's getting small.
Okay, so we don't really want to focus too much on the literature review of this because it's not super practical, but what we took and incorporated into this presentation is Jacob's idea of cooperative learning, where giving students a goal that they work through either cooperatively, competitively, or individually really helps with the final outcome for the project. And the authenticity of the materials you use has a direct effect on how much students are engaged in what they're doing. And giving the authentic materials, their motivation goes up, their interest goes up, and it's something real that they can interact with on a far more useful level than some of the other ones can be.
And with the majority of the curriculum that we develop, reading, speaking, listening, writing, we try to focus on task-based learning as opposed to language learning, where the outcome of the student activity is meaning-focused as opposed to language or mechanics-focused. And I think a lot of teachers do without really even thinking about it, used Willis's task-based language teaching framework for setting up the task, where there's a pre-task phase, and then there's a planning phase, there's an execution phase, there's a consolidation of learning phase, and then a presentation phase where the students are activating their knowledge and sharing it. Right? So it's not just internalizing, but again, outputting what they've learned. So,
all right, this project focuses on Kiva. Has anyone ever heard of Kiva? It's a micro-lending nonprofit website. And the idea behind micro-lending, traditionally when you need a loan for something, you go to a bank or a financial institution, they give you the money, you pay it back over X amount of time with interest. And micro-lending takes it down to almost the crowdsourcing level. So it's individuals all giving small amounts to make up a whole loan. And Kiva uses the micro-lending platform for people in need, mostly in developing countries. And part of why they do it is to wean people off the cycle of dependence on charitable donations. It's really hard when you are waiting for charity to come in or a donation to come in, and through microlending, these individuals can either expand a business or make improvements to their farm or home, and that will help them to become self-sufficient in the future so they do not need to have more loans or donations. So it's a really cool website, really cool project if you've never heard of it. The smallest amount of donation that you can give is $25. So if each person gives $25, together you make up a loan and it gets repaid to you. And the loans range anywhere from $100 to several thousand.
Yeah, and it's fantastic as a concept to bring into the classroom because 2,500 yen, $25 is a very accessible number to the students. And as we'll talk about later, you can bring that number into the classroom in a really real way to bring the learning onto this scale and give them access to some real information and real people to interact with, sort of open their minds to global possibilities. Okay, this project, before we move any further, just to give you a little bit more information about what we're talking about. On the Kiva website, there are profiles, people's profiles. People basically put a self-PR introduction for what they need money for, what they will do with the money, and how they plan to pay it back. And what we have done is taken the material, authentic material from that website, modified it so that it's accessible for the students, and set up a cooperative atmosphere in small groups and a competitive atmosphere within the class to have them campaign to collect money within the classroom, and it could be fake money or real money, on the behalf of the people that they're representing from the website. Okay, so just to clear that up, students are working together to create some sort of presentation. It doesn't have to be a presentation, but in our context it was, to try to raise money for someone. So with that in mind, what this project, what we can assess through this project is discussion outcomes. Okay, so the students are having small group discussions, and if you have some sort of discussion language or discussion curriculum in your speaking classes, it's useful for assessing that, applying that assessment. Reading comprehension, as was in later, reading the profiles of the people that they're going to be representing. Paragraph writing, writing their campaign speech for the person that they're representing. Presentation with visual aid creation, obviously giving this PR presentation for that person, and oral presentation. Okay, so it's an integrated, multi-skill, applied critical thinking curriculum, and these are the things that you can. We're going to talk about assessing through the course of the project. Okay. Now, before we get started, there are a lot of considerations, and we've been kind of hedging as we've been talking, that we should probably talk about before talking about the curriculum. And the first is language ability. We are personally of the belief that there is no floor, really, for language ability for this project. If you grade the materials, if you create them with your students' needs in mind, I think that all of this is accessible for all students. What's more important than language ability is
student motivation. If you have a class of students who seem eager to interact with the world outside of them, or are able to place themselves in the shoes of someone else, or even just have the maturity to be able to think about other people, this would work really well. It could be a junior high school class has that ability where a university class may not. So it kind of depends on your context and your students and how well you think they would be with interacting with this material.
another consideration, of course, is your classroom. A classroom like this is ideal. It's got movable desks, it's got movable chairs, there's a space for presenting, there's a space for listening. There are different phases in this project: instruction phases, group discussion phases, creation phases. So having a flexible classroom with movable chairs and desks is a definite plus, not a must, but definitely a plus when running this curriculum.
Time. How much time do you have to run it? Our recommended schedule is 8 to 11 45-minute classes. You could put those together if you have university classes, because those tend to run longer. In our high school, we only have 45 minutes per period. If you have 90, you could put them together and have 3 to 5 classes and move a lot of it out to the homework section that they bring in. So as long as you have enough time in your curriculum to do this, then you might be okay.
Right. And the final consideration is classwork homework. And this is both in relation to the amount of time you have, but also where you want to put the focus on the learning. Do you want the students to be doing more reading? If so, reading alone. If so, put that out of class. If you want it to be more group focused, have them do reading in class. If you want the writing to be collaborative, do that in class. If you want the writing to be personal and gradable on individual students' writing skills, you do that outside of class. So while you're watching the step-by-step explanation of what the project actually is, please think carefully about these 5 elements and how they apply to your context when thinking about how you can modify it to fit your needs. Okay, so the first step in the project, step 0, is getting ready. Okay, so it's prep heavy, this project. You have to go gather information, go to the Kiva website, find candidates whose situation is interesting, find a variety of candidates so that, like for example, rather than have all farmers that have similar needs, if you have a farmer and a teacher and a nurse and people who have different needs so that groups can think about different ways to appeal to that person. That creates a more stimulating atmosphere in the classroom, but it does take quite a bit of prep. And you have to grade the texts. We use LexTutor to do this. It's a very useful website where you can plug in, you basically paste or type in a body of text, and then it profiles it using frequency word lists, right? And the idea with frequency word lists is that you have words that appear more frequently, more often, that you can assume that the students will know, most likely, and ones that appear less often are words that they're less likely to know. So if you split those word lists into groups of 1,000, you can expect a high school student to know 80%-ish of the first 1,000 most frequent words in English. A little bit less of the second 1,000, a little bit less of the third 1,000. But using something like LexTutor, you can grade your materials to make sure that they're appropriate for your learners.
Is that like a website?
Yes. So if you Google LexTutor, you'll find it.
It's the first one.
Oh, okay. It's free?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely free.
You can grade it by the GSL level. You can use it to check readability level, often with like the
Okay.
US standard
Yeah.
grade level. You can check it for a lot of stuff.
And there's a very good frequently asked questions and sort of tutorial on the website. So if words like grading vocabulary or frequency word list or GSL, if you're getting question marks, it's got very good explanation on the site, and it has all access links and things to the research that backs up the need and usefulness of doing that. And then finally, create student work. Originally I said create student worksheets, but I eliminated that thinking that what we have prepared is paper-based, but if you have an e-learning classroom, if you're able to use computers, then I think that these materials could be modified to be done in some sort of like discussion room or online environment. So this is all before, this is what you do. And then the rest of it's on the students. It gets a lot easier after that for the teacher. A lot more difficult for the students though.
Okay, step 1 is the introduction to the project in general, and to get students thinking about people in other areas of the world and what they're going through and how different their lives could be. We give them about 10 minutes of just full class discussion. What are some problems that people around the world have? Maybe they don't have money. Maybe they don't have schools. Maybe they don't have clean water. Maybe they don't have access to health care. All the types of things that most of our students in Japan take for granted because this is a nice place to grow up as a kid. And throwing all those on the board often helps them to look at one and think of 5 more. So we like to just spread all their answers out so they can see them as they're answering. And then after we go through that, we give them the pictures that you were just handed out. These are real pictures, not necessarily from Kiva, just real pictures of students and people around the world. And we have them look at these pictures and say, what are the problems that these people face?
What needs might be?
Yeah, what needs would they have? And what are they missing? Or what could help them looking at the picture? From there, it tends to go off into what we told you about Kiva. What is microlending? If everyone gave 100 yen, the class would have
2,000 yen.
2,500,
Yeah.
and we'd be able to make a loan. So it shows them at a really individual level that their tiny contribution can be something big, which is useful for high school students who don't have a lot of chances to help, kind of just given their situation. And the project outcome. This is where if you want to use real money in the classroom, collect the money, keep it, and then tell them whoever has the most persuasive presentation at the end, their person, their individual that they're sponsoring, I guess, gets the class loan. And then you as a class actually get to go on the website and give the money to them.
Yeah, you can set
So
up
the
a
students can
profile,
actually
yeah.
see it, that it's being used and it's helping someone, and it's a project that has a real tangible goal at the end. And the assessment for this, really simple. Keep it non-threatening, just get them to get ideas, 0 or 1. Did they speak? Did they do something? Did they not?
Right.
Which is pretty easy.
Did their group produce something? Did they give ideas? And I tell you what, nothing motivates a class like a glass jar full of yakuin coins. It's a very good way to get them with their eye on the prize. So that's step 1. Okay, and for us, remember, each step is a 45-minute class. This was a 45-minute lesson. Okay, and then for step 2, we start to focus on issues. Now we had them brainstorm problems in the world, and now we're having them focus on specific issues. So the students were given a packet. There were 5 pictures. We've given you 4 of them. There were 5 pictures, and the students, each group was asked to choose one of the pictures. Okay, so they choose one of the pictures, and we said, okay, identify as many issues or as many problems as you can. What things might these people need? What might they have access to? What might they not have access to? Why do you think so? Okay, and we had them do this in a small group discussion, and we encouraged them to participate in the discussion using a variety of different techniques. One of the we have 2 of them here. So there are 2 good ways to, in our experience, to stimulate student participation in discussions and to make sure that one student is not dominating or one student isn't able to check out. The first is a participation chart. This is a simple ladder with numbers 1 to 10, and basically every time a student takes a turn, every time they make a comment, whether it's giving an idea, agreeing, or disagreeing, or giving some sort of verbal input to the discussion, they make a mark on the chart, and by the end of the discussion, the group must have all members at the top of the chart. So this encourages more verbal students to turn to less verbal students and what do you think? Or do you agree? Or sort of bring some participation out of it. If you have some sort of discussion language curriculum in your class, which we have had in the past, you might look at something like this. You have discussion language, discussion criteria that the students have been introduced to in previous lessons, and they basically go through and try to get as many checks into their rubric as they can. So this will help them develop their discussion skills. On the back of the discussion chart, there is the handy-dandy discussion skills triangle, which is something that has been very successful in our classroom. Basically, just a quick explanation. This is one discussion interaction in the classroom. Somebody gives an opinion, they pass or prompt somebody else to speak, and then that person gives a response and then gives their own opinion. So like, for example, I think that most people in this room are hungry and want to go to dinner. What do you think?
Well, I would agree with that because I am hungry and I want to go to dinner.
Okay. So she has then agreed, given her response, and then given her own opinion. And then were we a larger group, she would have then passed it on to another person. That person would have agreed or disagreed, given their opinion. And that helps them, again, that helps everyone participate in this discussion. So this is where we start having group accountability, trying to get everyone in on the project, using their English, using their listening skills, their speaking skills.
Okay, and then the next thing we do is we actually have all the students try the same profile together to make sure they understand where we're going with it. So we hand out one single profile and the whole class gets the same person, basically. And we introduce the idea on the outline. So on the back of the profile that you got, there's the outline. The students need to identify the person. Who are they? Where do they live? What do they do? What is their family life? What is their income level? What are their problems? Why are they asking for money? And go through and just find these basic parts of information about each person, get into the idea, the mindset of outlining and using this because they will need to do it later with their group profile. This is a really good part if you want to cut down classes. This could be homework. Or if you want to add more of a writing component, they can have to write this out. You could grade the actual outline they create. If you need more grades in your grade book, it could be compliance, or you can use the assessment scale we have here, which is the 0 through 3, 0 being nothing, they didn't even do it. Number 1 being you wrote some stuff on your paper before class started. Number 2 would be something okay, and number 3 would be good answers. So it's a simplified way to just grade student compliance if you don't just want to say yes or no.
Exactly. And it holds, it sticks with the sort of task-based learning spirit of this whole activity, where you're not focused on the actual quality of the language output, but rather whether or not the language output the language that was produced is relevant to the task goal. Okay. So I would say steer away from getting kids to write full grammatical sentences, and instead encourage them just to get their ideas on these groups. And again, you can do other things with these as well, like have them read, and then if you have journals, like weekly free writing that students do, have them, what do you think? Imagine you're one of these people. What is your life like? There's a lot of possibilities for expanding this activity beyond just reading and then outlining. Okay. And then after the dry run, it begins. Okay. We start the project proper. Okay, so in step 3, every group in the class has been given the same profile, and then the students have gone through it together and checked to make sure that they understood how to outline. You've gone over it with the class, you've shown an example of perhaps a teacher outline, and highlighted, okay, this is the kind of information you want to be pulling out of the text and putting onto it, and now you give each group their own individual profile. Okay, so in these packets that we just gave you, there are examples of 2 profiles. These are profiles we actually used. And then basically, as the students are starting to think about their outline, this is a very good place to stress persuasion. Okay? You are a group doing a collaborative project, but you are competing against other groups in the class for this jar of Yakult coins. Okay? So saying that, like for example, this village gets most of their local drinking water from wells and streams and rainwater. Okay, that's a fact, and that's great. But if you say something like, if it doesn't rain, they don't have water. You add that at the end of it, you sort of bring their situation to life in a way that impacts people and inspires them to give money, right? Because that is the final end goal. And then you have the students have at it. Once again, use a sort of holistic assessment for this is what we recommend to keep the focus on the task outcome rather than the language. Did you try? Did you give it a college try? Did you do it at what we consider to be an acceptable level of detail? Okay, so the students have outlined their presentations.
Okay, the next part is writing the presentations, which the students do as a group.
Apologies.
Well, downside to using your watch.
Yeah.
Because this is a collaborative project, we required our students to write the entire presentation together. We didn't let them section off and say, you write that paragraph, I write that paragraph. They had to sit in groups and they had to do it together. And some classes are better at doing this without prompting, and some you have to hover over them and be like, yeah, guys, you're supposed to be doing this together, what are you doing? So it kind of just depends on the makeup of your class. But for their presentations, they need to have an opening and introduction. These tend to go together in one paragraph. It's a brief overview. Who is your person? Where are they? Why do they need this money? And then it goes after that into a causes paragraph. We asked them to use signal words because with us they had already written genre paragraphs with causes and they knew them, they'd studied them. And this required the logic. Okay, why do these people not have water? Why do these people not have enough farm equipment? Oh, well, they live in a really poor country that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure. Or, the pipes are really, really old in their school, so they can't get water there. They had to come up with the causes to identify how did that lead into the current problem that they have. The second one is the effects paragraph. What happens because the problem exists? Oh, well, maybe without clean water, the children are getting sick. They have to go to the hospital. They have to, they can't go to school because they're sick from drinking the water. Okay, what happens because of the problem? And they try to do it in a way that's logical, but also makes you feel bad, right? Oh my gosh, those poor children don't have water. We need to give them this money so they can build new pipes. And the last one is how to help. This again brings in that persuasive argument, okay? If we give them this money, they can do this, and it will lead to this. And we ask them to use a causal chain and follow the chain several ways down. So, but if they go to school, they can get good jobs. And if they get good jobs, maybe they can improve their family situation later. And we had them follow it. And then it goes back to the bookend as kind of a whole here, which is just the closing. Usually a call to action at the end. Please help our family, or please help our school. There's two methods of assessment with this. We had the actual structure because we taught them how to write paragraphs, topic sentences, signal words, conclusions. And then the persuasion. So were your arguments logical but also triggering the empathy of people who need to be listening? So there was kind of a multifaceted way to assess those.
Right, and if you think that, having your own teacher's subjective opinion of how persuasive their argument was seems a little unfair, then put it in the hands of the listeners. When of course they're voting on the best presentation, but often that'll be the most well-spoken person who gets it. So if you give a listening task, which we'll talk about, that allows the students to express an opinion about the group's overall persuasiveness or how much they were feeling for that person, then that gives you some sort of basis for measuring how persuasive subjectively a presentation is. By the way, signal words, things like results in, due to, consequently. So these are the words that we encourage them to use in their writing, and of course we're doing applied skills. We want them integrated skills. We want them using it in the presentation as well. Oh, in our context, by the way, we teach all 4 skills plus vocabulary. So the students are writing things other than this. They are reading things other than this. They're doing speaking activities other than this. This is just one unit in the year as well. So, and then step 6 is presentation preparation. And this is an example of, so in the first time that we did presentations like this, we gave the students a poster and said, have at it. Here's some markers, go ahead and design. And you end up eating a lot of class time because students can't decide on a final design, or I want to draw a picture, I want to write words, and there's just a whole lot of back and forth about that. So what we ended up doing was giving them an A3 page. A3 is about this big, that looks like this. And our classroom is about the same size as this. So if you can imagine this in this size, we asked the students to very carefully think about what they were putting in each causes, effects, results, as well as the introduction of their person, so that it would be accessible to the people in the back of the classroom. This, honestly, was, for the whole process, the most hands-on teacher required part of it, because it was a lot of going around to groups and keeping kids on task, and grabbing a poster and bringing it to the front of the room and saying, hey, can you see this? Ooh, they said they can't see. I'm going to redesign. So helping them design an effective visual aid was a bit more hands-on than we were expecting. But again, by scaffolding it, by showing them where the information needs to go, by limiting the amount of space they had, as well as limiting the canvas, that gave the students some very clear guidelines on what they were to do. And then, of course, depending on how much time you have, you can also give the students a chance to practice, give them a presentation skills lesson, if that's something that's part of your curriculum. How should you stand? What kind of voice is appropriate for this kind of presentation? What kind of expressions? You don't want to be giving a smiley, happy presentation if you're talking about people dying in Laos, right? So, if you have time, this is a very good place to build those skills as well. In our classes, we had maybe 30, 40, maybe one class dedicated to practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. About that. So they make their posters and then they would practice.
All right, last one is the actual presentation. Before we go in, we always try to remind them, hold up the money. Remember, one of you will get this. Who will it be? Because then it stimulates their competitive spirits before they start going. Especially the outspoken kids in class, they'll get really into it. And then after that, the students are given a listening task. If your students are anything like ours, they're high school students, and as soon as they're not directly doing something, they have completely checked out. So they are required to take notes on the other students' presentations, and they also have to give all of them a score. So each group for us had 4 students in it, and they had to write the student name and then give each student a score like, oh, I could hear you, it was good. Oh, you had good gestures, you had good eye contact. And then overall, they had to decide, was it impactful, right? Did you feel something after you saw this presentation? It could have been done on a group or individual level for that. Did your group do it well, or did the individual people do it well? Both methods of assessment for that are okay. After the students had all presented, we had them circle whoever they thought was the best presentation. We collected these and then we tallied up. Who had the most circles? That group won. And you could not vote for yourself, which is why this one is grayed out.
We had 6 groups in each
Because they all wanted to vote for themselves. So that was not an option for them.
Yeah.
And then when they gave the presentations, they had to stand up. It's always a good lesson to learn that when you're standing next to your group, but you are not the one presenting, you can't stand off to the side and be looking around and talk to your friend in the front row because your group is still presenting and you still have to be there.
Oh, sorry.
For some reason, we always had to tell them to take their masks off because they always try to give presentations with masks and you couldn't do anything because it's just like this. So it was good for those presentation skills, especially as a group instead of individually, because they so quickly forget that they're standing in front of a classroom and everybody else is watching them when they're not speaking. So we graded them in their presentations: voice, eye contact, body language, gestures. Could we understand what you were saying? And did you have it memorized? Because many of them thought it would be very clever to have their friend hold up their paper in the front row so they could just be like this. So they got docked points for all of that. Just to teach those presentation skills and then have their classmates determine how well they've done with it.
Actually, in my classroom, I had to draw on the board, like, this is the space the speaker stands in. And then this is the space that, because you would have, somebody would finish speaking and then just
And then they just like stand
they
there.
would step right in front of the poster. And then the other person would be over there and they just start speaking. I'm like, what are you, how is this even? So again,
Good lesson all around.
well, but again, the lesson of this the whole time is that, it feels like as the teacher, the preparation, all of the making of the materials, that's the hard part. That's the part you really have to think about. But in an integrated skills curriculum, every step of the way, there are going to be these little, hurdles, road, speed bumps, toll booths, whatever you want to call them. The places that the students are going to stumble, some students are going to stumble, and you need to have your head on a swivel and really have an active understanding of what the students are doing and what they need. Okay. So overall assessment, again, we just looked at these together. Katie just talked about it a bit. For the speakers, we graded them on posture, appropriate voice, appropriate body language, appropriate eye contact, memorization. And I think we have pretty similar ideas about what all these things are. But for example, for posture, we talk together and say, what is good presentation posture? And get the students to come up with, okay, where should my hands be? Where should my feet be? How should my shoulders be? Where should my stomach be? And then get them to set their own standards for what they're comfortable with. Appropriate voice, think about the size of the classroom, the people you're speaking to. Appropriate body language, don't over-gesture. Don't have your hands floating when you're not really saying anything that needs them. This is the number of students who stand up and speak like this. What are you doing? So getting them to talk about that. Appropriate eye contact, scan the room, look at everyone, meet eyes, but don't keep them, because staring at one person for a long time is really creepy, both for the presenter and for everyone, really, if you're staring at one person. And of course, memorization. And then for listeners, again, the presentation notes, as you saw, did they write each student's name? Did they write the problem, so that the name of the group or what they needed? And then did they write in the notes, did they write their impression? And here Japanese is okay. Because remember, the focus of this project is not language-centered. The focus of this project is the presentation itself and whether or not it has impact. Okay, so there's a lot of ways that this curriculum can be adapted to make it more language-focused, but we chose to keep it task-focused to allow students to apply the skills they were learning in other areas of their studies in a real, authentic situation. Right, so this is the end of our presentation, and at the end I just wanted to talk a little bit about ways to maybe adapt to other contexts and maybe get some of your ideas as well, but I'll give you my ideas first. If you're teaching in a high school and you have fewer classes, again, the classwork homework balance is something that could be played with. You could, as long as you hit the major skills, how do we outline in class, then outlining can be done out of class. How do we write? Well, if you scaffold it properly, just fill in the information here. They can write that at home. All of these things can be done outside of the classroom. So with 45-minute periods, maybe you could cut it under 8 classes, maybe you could have it in 5 or 6 if you really pushed it. If you have more classes, you could do things like have the students research a little bit more about the background of the area that people come from. We don't have them looking at the situation in Laos, but like for example, for these people, for local villages in the jungles of Laos, what sort of problems do they have? Are there any notable communities that have come up in the news? Where do they get their food? How's the education situation? Is child labor a problem there? What other social issues might they have? There's a lot of ways to expand this if you have more time and resources, access to the internet and things, and students who know how to use them. That's very important. And you can change the focus as well. This was a presentation focus. Like I said, you can make it more language-centered and say, read this information and write a persuasive essay or paragraph about why this person needs to be helped. It could be descriptive. What is this person's situation? Please tell us about them. It could be creative writing. Imagine you're one of these people. Imagine you were in this situation. What might a day in your life be like? There are a lot of different ways that you can take these basic materials and adapt them for different focuses. And then for university, as Katie said at the beginning of the presentation, with simple math, put together 2 45-minute classes, you get a 90-minute class. But you can achieve a lot more in 90 minutes than you can in a 45-minute class because generally the first 3 to 5 minutes are lost in every class.
Always.
And always at the end of class, there's some scrambling and cleanup and all the rest of it. So you can certainly achieve more, which is why we said 8 to 11 in high school, and only 3 to 5 in university, because having that extra time, you can just push them to do more in class and push them to do more out of class. And also, there's no reason to be as ambitious as we are about making this a, thinking beforehand and, brainstorming and reading, note-taking, writing. You could just focus on the absolute basics and say, read this and read this. I have $5. Who should get the $5? And you can have it be something like, have you ever heard of the Who Gets the Heart discussion? That's a very popular English language learning activity where you have 4 or 5 profiles of people who need a heart transplant. And each one of them, like this is a single man who has no family but works for a nonprofit organization that saves children. This is a mother of 3, an unmarried mother of 3. So it forces the children to make a tough decision based on a number of different considerations. You could turn this into that kind of discussion where you have different people in different situations who have different needs. Which one should we help? Please make a decision within the time we've given you. There are a lot of different things you can do with this project, but really accessing the material, making that material accessible for your students. Once you've done that, you can do so much with it. You can do so much with it.
All right, that's it.
That's it for us.
So, if you have any questions for us,
I was interested in your presentation because I teach intercultural communication in a university level, right? And among the things I teach in that class regarding intercultural communications, also I try to make them be aware of the world around them, which, as you know, Japanese students tend to be privileged. Even the ones that are not, compared to what's happening on the world, they're privileged, and it's hard for them to actually really understand some stuff like there's people that do not eat, not even once a day, things like that, right? So I think that what you're doing is good for that, but because it's a university, right? I guess there are I can see a couple of institutional barriers for it, and if somebody else works in the university, please feel free to chip in first. I could be mistaken, but I think that in universities, receiving any sort of money from students is a taboo.
Which is why it's optional. You can have paper money. You could have, what's your first name?
Javier.
You could have Javier dollars. You can have them collect the
yeah,
Javier
they
dollars.
can just give them in class and just be pieces of paper.
Yeah, but you're actually doing the loan, or not?
So that's an option, right?
Uh-huh.
Actually giving the loan makes it more real, and it raises the overall affect, the student motivation in the classroom. But this could be, you could write fictional, you could write this about people living on another planet and have any resource, whether it's, we have ore to give them, or we have spaceships to give them. It doesn't matter what it is, but yes, gathering money was a huge institutional barrier
Yeah,
into the high
I
school.
have the same question about that.
You'll have to alter it if there is a no.
The way I see it is that money, I think that doing the actual donation should be done because this is for creating awareness, and it's important that at the end all this work actually helps somebody, and it's for promoting all that, right? But there's a couple of problems. The way I see it is that you are not in charge of something. Some student is.
Mm-hmm.
There is a leader for that, and the teacher is a teacher, and it's a class thing, right?
Absolutely.
Right, but I still think that there should be some institutional permissions or something there, right?
For sure.
That's one thing. The second thing is that if I understood when it's a loan,
Yes.
you're giving, it's not a donation.
Yep.
Which means that if it's a loan, it'll eventually come back.
Yep.
Probably 1 year, 2 years when your students are. So who will get the money?
Right. So so what happens to money once it comes back into Kiva?
It just goes straight back into your profile in Kiva and you relend it. You can't actually get money out.
You can't cash out of Kiva.
So once you put money in it, it just sits there and it gets reloaned as soon as you have a $25 base back from the loans that come back in pieces, and then you choose another person to relend it for. So actually, if you do it multiple years, you could also tack that onto next year's.
I
So
see.
you could say, okay, in addition to your money, we have last year's money, and you can either do one winner that gets all of it or a first and second place, and then send it out that way, but it's always in the account.
So in that case, it's better if the account is institutional.
Or
Yes,
in her
Or-
case, private.
or I just use mine,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I'm not getting the money back.
Yeah. This year we did not jump through the hoops for institutional permissions. The only option that we had is private accounts, and it was.
So you can always set up your own account and just show the students that this is just $25 that I had. Who's gonna get it? And then the money is still real, but they're not giving it to you. Which might get around some of those institutional problems. Could be your money, and they just have to persuade you where to give it.
By the way, before coming, I checked with my university next year, and they will approve a 2,500 yen deduction from my research budget for this project. So there's that option as well.
Okay.
Kind of clever get-arounds for that, yeah.
But no, I
We
anytime there's
also had
money
to
in the
do that.
classroom
We
mix,
also
that
had
is
to
a
go through
big,
those, so.
that's a big issue. Absolutely. And something that, it's not to be taken lightly. If we have any first time or pre them, he hasn't started teaching yet. He's still, considering getting into the field. Anytime you ask students for money, you have to be really careful about what you do. But having, in a high school, you have a homeroom teacher. Having the homeroom teacher collect as part of, they collect money from the students all the time. And having that just be one more thing that the homeroom teacher holds on to and goes into the bank account that's associated with those students until a certain time. There are a lot of different ways, but definitely considering if you want to make it a real money thing, all of the different implications of that. Yeah, that's definitely.
Please get permission.
Absolutely, fantastic advice.
What's your general policy on use of Japanese for the small group discussions when they're doing the writing practice or signing on the poster? My students usually have a lot of trouble with that transactional negotiating language. So I tend to be a bit more relaxed in those cases when they're playing
We
rather
kind of
than
do
the
too.
process. Yeah,
Actually. But sometimes if we have given them enough things that they can use, like that piece of paper that says, here's how you say these things, sometimes we say there's no reason you can't say a sentence off of this paper right here and just read it. Then we'll put the group numbers on the board and give them a score of 10. And as we're walking around, each time we hear Japanese, we'll just take a point off.
Right. So
And
just
then the
some-
group sits
some-
there, and then the whole group will start policing themselves, right? They'll be like, no, English, and then they'll be really careful, and so then you can just kind of casually just knock points off, and that's like a group score for that day, is
How
what
do
they
they do
get.
the group writing, discussing amongst themselves what's going to be written and who writes what when they're doing that together?
They all have a paper.
Yeah.
So actually, they all write. They have to discuss together what they write, but they individually hand in their papers because there's inevitably a student who's not doing anything.
Right. So what?
They don't get a score because they didn't write anything on their paper. And we don't want to penalize the group members for them not participating.
Right, and different, rather than have one student who has better handwriting take all the brunt of writing, even if everyone's writing together, we've done different things in our classes. What I did this year was I had each student write, you have a time limit for how long they write, and then they pass to the left. and then they pass to the left and they pass to the left, and the group decides together, on a count of 3, point at the one that you think we should use in our presentation, and they go, that one. And then everyone's written something, everyone's produced something, and then, so they take that one and say, okay, is there anything we can use from the other paragraphs that would make this a stronger paragraph? They Frankenstein it, they come up with something that's better than any individual one was, and then they move on to the next stage.
Does the classroom have access to computers or no?
Nope.
If
No,
it
I
did-
was thinking that it would have, instead of the A3, it's just a PowerPoint template.
Absolutely.
I wish we had technology.
Yeah.
We have basically nothing. So
Or
it's
phones.
all analog.
Okay.
So, yeah. But again, like I
Could be
said,
adapted easily to
Right.
a PowerPoint. So that would be an excellent way to take it if you had university students that actually did have computers.
absolutely.
Well, actually,
Yeah, and the other thing is that with regard to English use in the classroom, other than taking the you have 10 points unless you want less, use Japanese. If you have done discussion language classes before that, and you encourage them to use the phrases appropriately, even if they are using Japanese. Like if they don't have the language for it, like I think they need michi michi doro road. Yes, road. So you encourage them to do their best to, and if they have those skills, those scaffolded skills, and they're applying them, then it's just a matter of flipping that switch when they have to do it in real life. In the classroom, there's no need to make it a threatening environment. Let them relax, and is our attitude towards it. So.
Unless they get really bad.
Unless they get really bad.
When my patience is worn thin, that's when they start losing points. So
Yeah, for sure.
they can usually tell on my face when it's coming. So, but we did this in the second semester, and we see our students 5 hours a week. And so by the second semester with us, they'd already figured out what the rules for the classroom were. They were really comfortable with us, and we had a rapport with the whole class. And so it worked a lot better with them knowing the classroom rules rather than starting with this, because we'd already pre-taught a lot of the stuff, and we'd already been a little stricter on things.
Yeah.
So when it got to this, they kind of just did it naturally.
For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
I-
good. They're good kids.
I wish that this kind of lesson was taking place in public schools.
Me too.
It's
Even
nice.
companies
It's
do
nice.
Yeah, companies, right?
Yeah,
things,
companies,
things
they're
like
all
this
screwed
is, what the students really, really need for successful language learning, and most kids that go to public schools don't get this.
And we're lucky that we have a integrated skill classroom that we get pretty much full control over.
That's great.
Yeah.
But it's not a real common scenario, I don't think, with teachers here.
I'll be doing this at in an elective class at university next semester. I'm planning 4 classes for it, so.
Do you have your students memorize the presentation?
Yep.
To the best of their ability. I mean, there are 2 options. I've also in the past given them, you're allowed to have a cunning card. You're allowed to have a cheat card, but it has to be hideable in your hand. You only get set restrictions. Like for example, you can have as many pictures as you want, but up to 6 words or 2-word phrases on one side. Right? So they have 2 sides, a total of maybe 16 words total, plus as many pictures as they want to remind them. But nothing.
There are rooms for flexibility.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Teaching students tend to memorize all of
Right.
them and then just say it. And
Right.
Oh wait, no,
yeah, that is
that's not the case. I use a cheat sheet.
Yeah, there you go. Everyone does it. But so one thing, we do a lot of fluency development in our speaking classes, and one thing that we do is Paul Nation's, I forget what the numbers are, 5, 3, 2, I think. So basically, we set a timer and say, okay, give your presentation, you have 5 minutes. And then we say, okay, give your presentation again, you have less time. Give it again, you have less time. So if a kid is using a cheat sheet card that has only the key points, each time they give the presentation, they're going to be refining it. They're going to be doing it differently every time. So in the end, what they end up saying is not what they've written, but is almost a better version of it because it's one that fits them as they speak better. So they're looking at those pictures, they're looking at those key points, and in the end, when they've failed to remember something they've memorized, they don't stumble and fall silent. They just keep speaking because that's what you've trained them to do with these fluency development activities.
And we don't actually grade on, are you saying exactly what you
Yeah.
wrote?
They get an essay grade.
Yeah, they get a grade on that, but
Presentation.
we never are like, oh, you missed that word, oh, you missed that word. I actually tell my higher level kids,
Swing it.
don't, wing it. It's better when you just wing it because they can do it off the cuff. as long as they have those key points, that's actually an important part. So the memorization, we didn't have a lot of issue with this, especially because presenting together, they all only had to do one paragraph. And if they can't memorize one paragraph, then we had trouble by that point. So they
There's
were
no
actually
detention.
fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Go out.
So, oh, you know, if you have to
Write some
pick, you're
dictionary
staying after
pages.
school.
That's what I did in the past. Look at dictionary pages.
Oh, I've had
Try
I've
that.
had teachers like that in my
Takes
career
like
as well.
half an hour.
It's awful. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Thank you all for coming out. If you, we are more than happy to share every material we've created, not just these ones. If you're interested in connecting with us, collaborating, sharing materials, please come up and talk to us. We'll give you email addresses and things. But yeah, have a nice evening. Enjoy the pizza party if that's where you're going.
Oh, what's happening tonight?
There's a pizza party.
A pizza party?
I don't know.
Yeah, but it's
I'm not part of
only
it.
12 people.
Okay.
Well,
They could only get up.
Yeah, so
where's it? Where's it? I gotta